We are all leaders. You have to lead yourself to tune into this podcast. You have to lead yourself to decide what you want to accept from what Frank and I are talking about today. You will have to make all kinds of leadership decisions on actions that you yourself take. That's leading, folks. So don't buy into the fact that you're not a leader. In your organization, you're not even a manager yet. Throw that all out the window. You are a leader.
Alden, talk to me about the difference between what you call the whisperer, which I believe is the winner's voice, and the whiner's voice inside of our head.
When I bring that conversation up, that conversation came from my first Navy SEAL instructor. Now, this guy was a character. We called him Instructor Half Butt. That's because his left butt cheek had been blown off by a rocket-propelled grenade in Vietnam. He's on his last tour of duty. And, this is a key story early on in Unstoppable Mindset, the book. And he talked like this. And he would say, "You all want to know the secret of making it through Navy SEAL training?" And at the time, there's 122 of us all lined up, and we're waiting to take our final test. And the final test was the same one we'd already passed 4 times before. It was a PT test, which is a physical training test of push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups, a swim, and a run. We had to pass that 3 times just to show up at SEAL training. Then you had to take it again the first day you arrived. Then they put you in a holding cell for 7 weeks. And at the end of 7 weeks, this Instructor Half Butt, we'll call him, comes out and offers up the secret to Navy SEAL training. And so we break ranks and we're all huddled around him. And he goes, "Oh, yeah, that Navy SEAL secret. Well, it ain't complicated. It's hard, but it ain't complicated. You see, you just have to decide what you're going to think about. You're going to think about the pain of training, or you're going to think about the pleasure that training can provide you." Now, I know for a fact over 80% of you are going to think about the pain. You know why? Because you all been thinking about being a SEAL on a sunny day. And you see, that's the rub. You see, a country, she don't need SEALs on sunny days. She needs them on scary days when it's cold and it's dark and wet. And he looks up and he goes, "Oh, and that crack over your head, that ain't thunder. That's somebody want you dead. How bad you want to be a SEAL on that day, We're all standing around. Yeah, we're in. Uh-huh. "You know what my job is," he goes on. "It's to create a conversation in here that's going to drive you to make a decision of what you're going to think about." Now, he goes on for a little while, but I truncate that story to share with everybody that you don't have to go through SEAL training to deal with this conversation. We all have the conversation. And I dedicate the second chapter of the book to learning to lead this conversation. And before I get into more detail of that conversation, I want to set a couple of ground rules for everybody. Number 1, we are all leaders. You have to lead yourself to tune into this podcast. You have to lead yourself to decide what you want to accept from what Frank and I are talking about today. You will have to make all kinds of leadership decisions on actions that you yourself take. That's leading, folks, all right? So don't buy into the fact that you're not a leader, that in your organization, you're not even a manager yet. Throw that all out the window. You are a leader. Number 2, you are imperfect. We are all imperfect. We can't do it all. We will make mistakes. Okay, we need each other. I want you to understand that piece. And on that point, when we're leading ourselves, we will always have 2 forces to deal with, and that's the conversation. Now, Frank started off with saying about the winner and the whiner. Now, I call that high-level conversation these 2 main voices, negative, positive. On the negative side, and I bring to life the whiner. The whiner is a very loud, and for me, it's like a 10-year-old Alden voice. Who says you can do this? You know how hard this is going to be? You shouldn't even be here. You have asthma. Why do you think you can make it through SEAL training? And by the way, you suck at doing push-ups and you even suck worse at running. And look at all these other guys. They're all stronger than you. They're all faster than you. You shouldn't be here. Get out of here. You don't need to be here, right? That's the whiner. Now, the whiner is a very loud voice, and the whiner comes to us in all kinds of different directions. It represents our negativity bias. Negativity bias is a well-known, documented portion of our brains that has now been around for a couple million years. And when I say that portion, it's not carved out saying, oh, that's where negativity bias lives. We have negativity bias inside of us, and we put a higher level emphasis on negative than we do positive. It's a survivability mechanism built into us. And then there's a quieter voice, and it whispers. And I call that voice the whiner. And the whiner will say things like, get up, try again. You can do it. You got this. Keep going. Now it's hard. It's so hard to listen to the whispers of the whiner when we have so much of society built on negativity bias. Now, what do I mean by that? Just turn on the news, right? We watch ABC Nightline News sometimes. For the first 28 minutes, it's all negative. And then they'll talk for 1 minute about America Strong. Oh, look at someone who did something good. Everything else is tuning into all the negativity. That's survivability, right? We find news in the negative. If you really buy into a whole bunch of news, you'll start to think that we're going to hell in a handbasket. And how are we not even alive today? And then, and by the way, our biggest critic is the one inside. We have external forces and we have internal forces. And the ones inside, we are so good at talking to ourselves in such a negative way that I guarantee you, you would never allow anyone to talk to you the way you beat yourself up. The way we all beat ourselves up, which, by the way, just leads to more bruising to ourselves. So if we learn to lead that conversation and learn to lead the positivity of the whispers and create some mantras that say, hey, I got this. I'm a good person. We can do better. We are doing better. That is what I'm talking about with that conversation. And I go into breaking the whiner into 5 different voices that show up, right? The doubter, the hypothesizer, right? Creating negative hypotheticals. Well, wait a second. If I can't do this and I can't do that, why should I even start? The procrastinator. You know all the voices. We deal with them all the time.
Yeah, I definitely want to get into some of the tactics that the guys out there can maybe kind of, follow. And obviously, I know you go more in depth in the book, but I love the story of Half Butt. I had a great friend, and we've had Larry on the show a couple times. He was a lieutenant within the SEALs, oversaw some pretty big operations. I remember in the first conversation I had with Larry, he pointed out the fact that the objective of BUDS or boot camp is not to create SEALs. Everybody goes into training BUDS qualified, physically qualified. Like you said, you're doing the same physical test at the end that you were doing at the beginning. The goal there, I guess, is to weed out the ones that are going to listen to the whisperer, listen to the whiner and not hear that winner's voice. I guess a follow-up here would be, as we're navigating this and we're learning to hear that whisperer, the more we follow that voice, does the winner's voice become louder? Like, does that at any point become the dominating, or will the whiner's voice always be the more dominating voice inside of our head?
I think that's first up to you. And in the very beginning, I think the whiner's really loud because we're allowing it to be loud. There's an old Native American Indian story about 2 wolves. Have you heard this? There are always these 2 wolves that we fight. And the young warrior that's learning to become going through a rite of passage for Native American passage, he says, well, which wolf wins? And the wise old warrior says, the one you feed. And the two wolves are essentially another way of representing the positive and the negative of what we deal with. So in the beginning, when you say, well, which one is louder? Well, for most of us, I would say the whiner is louder. Over time, the whiner just becomes like a canary in the coal mine for us, an early warning system to say, oh, I'm pushing a boundary. The whiner's here now. The whiner's trying to hold me back, to bring me back to that comfort zone of mediocrity, to look in the rear view mirror, right? Because the whiner only knows what it knows. And the more comfortable we get with quieting the whiner, I don't think you ever get rid of the whiner. Now, by the way, I don't think it's a helpful thing to get rid of it because it's there for a reason. There are times where you're like, you know what? Maybe I ought to be paying a little more attention to this particular piece. Um, that's a judgment call. That's the leadership piece, right? And we get to decide who we want to listen to. That's up to us. That's our leadership. But the more we can start to prime our pump of saying, hey, you're a great person. We can do this. The past isn't going to define our future. We don't have to spend all our time in the past. The past was the past. We get to think about the future and we get to deal with right now, right here. And those pieces we can definitely dial down, right? The challenge becomes when we're doing something new to us. First chapter of the book is all about, hey, what are you going to do with an unstoppable mindset? If I gave you a pill or you ran across a genie that popped out of a bottle and said, Frank, I give you an unstoppable mindset. Now, what are you going to do with it? That's a big question. And for a lot of people, they would say, well, I'm going to do something I've never done before. Terrific. That's what I want you to do. That's the whole theme of the book is I want to inspire you that you're more capable than you realize and that I want you to go do that thing. Well, when you go do that thing, the whiner's going to show up a lot because you've never done it before. And by the way, you're going to fail at first. When you first started your podcast 5 years ago, I'm sure you weren't nearly the interviewer that you are today. Or when you created Rebuild and you were trying to think about, okay, how do we do a coaching organization that can really help other people? You had a lot of false starts. You didn't get that logo right the first time around. You were scratching your head and trying to think like, well, how can we show people rising from the ashes, right? And all of those things were all new to you. And each one of them, is this even right? Will this even work? Will somebody show up? Could I really help a church group or a school group or a bunch of middle-aged guys that are kind of pulling out their belly button trying to figure out what's my life worth and where should I go? Which, by the way, I've done it, right? I'm talking about myself here. When you're doing those things and you're pushing that envelope of what you've never done before, well, then the whiner shows up. And that's where you've got to start to think, all right, I'm going to put that in place. I'm glad it's here. That means I'm pushing a new boundary, but I've also got to find other people. I got to tune in to the superhuman life and hear other people of like, yeah, I've been there. I know that whining voice. It's okay. It's supposed to be there. Now move forward. Tune into us. Listen to us. We'll be your swim buddies too, and we'll help you get over that piece of the horizon that you weren't sure you could cross. Which is, by the way, is why I'm on this podcast, where I love what you're doing. Because I view that as this podcast being the swim buddy for those who are looking to do something they haven't done before.
Yeah, I appreciate that, man. And your analysis there was spot on. 5 years ago, I was, I want to say I was a young kid. I wasn't. I was 35 at the time, but it's like I had this dream, I had this calling, I had this vision of like my story can help others. Now, I didn't know how I was going to get out there. I didn't know who was going to listen. I didn't know what it was going to grow, evolve, turn into. I flipped the microphone on. I rambled for an hour on the first episode, nervous energy all over the place, probably had a tough time, pulling ideas and thoughts together. And then about 50 episodes, I felt like I kind of took it up another notch. And then kind of 100 episodes, we kind of took it up another notch. And here we are recording episode 249. It's like, okay, one book that's been helpful for me was Stephen Pressfield's Turning Pro. I started to treat this like a profession. How do you navigate a conversation? How do you carry? How do you know when to speak and when to let the guest speak? How do you let dead space fall into a conversation? And then we've updated, some of the production, higher quality video. We invested into higher quality microphones. So it's been this journey. And same thing with rebuilt back in January of 2020, like guys were asking me to help them. I had no previous success of working in the addiction space. I had some fitness background. I had some leadership that I built in the corporate realm. I had some bodybuilding, but I said it was a leap of faith. It was okay, guys, let's see what this can turn into. But all those doubts still, with some of the things we're doing now, still play. But what I've been able to do is lean on some of my past successes, right? Knowing that when I did lean into the winner's voice, lean into that whispers through bodybuilding or the other endeavors, that has been the proven track record for me that I can do these things. But it's also having a clear vision and a clear goal of what we're trying to accomplish. Like, I know what rebuilt recovery will look like in 10 years from now. And oftentimes that helps me quiet that whiner's voice, because I know there's always going to be doubts and haters. What role does having goals or a clear vision play in helping us hear that whispers and do those whispers become louder the more clear our goals and visions are?
Oh, I love that question. I'm going to get a prop to answer that question, okay? So I created this thing. This is called a vision board. Comes in a sleeve. I don't have the sleeve right now, but it calls it an unstoppable vision board. And it's an accordion, okay? An accordion's out on both sides, and it has a series of steps. They're not complicated, but the first piece is when you talk about a dream and where you see rebuilt recovery going, and what's the purpose of that. Before I get into all of this, I want everyone to understand, if you don't have a vision of where you're going, it's like a ship without a compass. You are at the mercy of the wind, the waves, the sea currents of the water, right? You are going to be blown and pushed in all different directions. But if you have a vision of where it can go, you can grow that vision. You can build on that vision. I want you to think of yourself like your own movie director, and you are crafting your movie. And this particular movie that you're thinking about is called Rebuilt Recovery, right? That's a dream. Now we take a dream and we go from that figment of an imagination to a vision. And when we do that, we create different storylines. These are a few of my visions, right? And underneath that vision, I drew a picture and I talk about it and I think about it just for me. It's just for me. I'm going from a figment of imagination, a little movie clip, to a broader outline of what I want the movie to be. And then the next piece of that is going from dream to vision, vision to goal. So that big decision there is, hey, we're going to put a timeline to this. And then when we put a timeline to it, now we're going to go from the big dream of something to starting to plan out when we can get things done. And that's where SMART goals show up. When we go from goal to daily action, right? And when we get to that piece, now we're doing specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, timely. That's what SMART goals mean. There's a time and a place for it, but not in the very beginning. And when we have all of that, now we're at a position that when the whiner is coming, we can stamp it down and say, no. I know the movie I want to star in. I don't want to star in a movie that's played in my past. I want to star in this movie that has yet to occur, but I'm building it out. I'm building the script, right? And I use this travel board right here as a reminder of the movies that I want to star in. And the more time that we take, could be a half an hour at night or in the morning, or when we're on an airplane, or we're driving in a long trip and we're just thinking about, hey, what's the next movie I want to star in? And when we start to have that direction, like you did when you were scared and you were muddling through your first 50 podcasts, I guarantee you the whiner in the first 5 were probably pretty loud. By the time you got to the 50th one, it was more quiet. By the time you got to 249 with us, you're like, woohoo, it's winter all the way, baby. I can't wait to have Alden back on. This is going to be fun together. And you're just looking forward to it. And where's the whiner? Gone. Not even there, right? And so now you got Rebuilt Recovery coming up, and we're like, hey, you know what? I did this in podcast. I can do this here. It's different, but in a lot of ways, it's still the same. And what's the same? It's something new to me, and I'm going to have to go through a bunch of trials and tribulations, and I'll fail forward. But if I don't know what I'm going after, it gets really hard really fast. And then we get subjected to the whiner.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I love the distinction there between the dreams and visions. And I want to kind of maybe help the audience out there understand what's the process from going from dream to vision. But I want to touch on your point that you just shared. I mentioned Stephen Pressfield and how his Burke turning pro was really foundational for me. I interviewed Stephen. He was somewhere in the 60s. So right around that 50 episode mark where I was talking about, like, I was just now catching, my stride as a podcaster. And I remember Stephen asked me, because we were actually talking predominantly on the interview about his book, The War of Art, and the resistance that we all face. And Stephen flat out asked me on the podcast, he said, Frank, what's the resistance that you're facing in your life right now? And I flat out told him, I said, you want to know the truth, Stephen? Every single time I set the lights up and I turn this recording on, I would have these moments back then that I'd sit here waiting and I would hope the guest wouldn't show up. Like, that was the thought, is I hope Stephen doesn't show up today because then I don't have to embarrass myself. Now, I don't deal with that anymore. Like, I've been looking forward to this conversation with you since we've had it on the calendar. And I know we had to reschedule it once, but it's like that past whiner's voice back then was like, please, he got held up in a meeting. Maybe the times got misorganized or something. I used to sit here and this voice inside of me, I hope they don't show up today. Now, once we were getting in the flow, like, all that stuff would kind of go aside. But I think I'm at the point now where I realize some of these resistance, some of these challenges, some of these whiner's voice, that's on the other side of that is actually where the growth is going to come from. Just like in bodybuilding, like, you go in the gym and it's painful. You break your body down to get to that next level. Let's talk about the dreams and the visions here, and taking dream into vision, because I think you're the first person I've ever heard distinctly talk about these things separately. So what's that process to go from dream, this is what I want, to actually vision, which becomes tangible with steps? Obviously, we want to point them to maybe get your vision board, but is there something we could share here with the guys to how to go from goal, dream to vision?
Yes. First, a shameless little advertisement. There is a free 30-minute Unstoppable Goals video. Just go to my website and you can download it. And I walk people through the 4-step process. Unstoppable Goals, alden-mills.com. Okay. I'm a goal fanatic. And what I mean by that is I'm talking about the big goals. I'm not talking about, hey, you're making your bed every day. Good. That's important, right? It's a good process. But when we talk about dreams, we have lots of dreams. We have lots of figments of imagination of all kinds of things. And they are just that. And they remain figments of our imagination until we decide to envision it. Now, when I talk about going to a vision, what I'm talking about doing is bringing the dream to life. And I'm talking about creating a script around this figment of your imagination. So I'm going to make something up for you. 5 years ago, people started asking you about, hey, Frank, I really love what you're doing on the podcast, but let's bring it down to the trenches and work with people and start coaching, and we can get into this recovery together. And your whiner's going, hey, you don't know anything about dealing with addiction. You're not certified in that. You need to go back to school, right? That's the procrastinator telling you've got to wait a couple more years before you're ready, because you're not ready yet. Right? It's coming at you. And you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. But then when that noise goes away, you're lying in bed and you can't go to sleep, and you're like, hey, what if I was able to get this rebuilt recovery platform out, and 20 years from now, 1 million people around the United States or around the world have all recovered from some addiction that is in alignment with our tools that we're using. What would that feel like? What would that be like? Like, wow, what would I do to make that happen? What would I be willing to sacrifice to make that, right? And you fast forward, and your heart, now you're not sleeping at all, because your heartbeat gets up and you're like, wow, oh my God, that would be so cool. And we could go this way, and we can go this way. And now we're dreaming without constraint, right? We're dreaming audaciously. And we took that little figment of imagination and we bolted on more. And we talked about this whole team of men and women and children that are all being positively impacted. And we're starting to see how this can change the family structure when a man rises up and leads himself to the best of their ability. And we're starting to untap their potential and activate them to the best superhuman they could be. And now you got goosebumps and it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you started thinking about this at 10 o'clock. And now you can't sleep because you got adrenaline all through you. You with me?
I've been there. Yeah. I think you said you're making this up, but I'm like, damn, Alden was there with me that night when all this was happening because you were laying this out exactly the way that it happened.
Yeah. Okay, that's the dream, right? It started as that dream of like, what if? And then we started adding to it. And that we started not just becoming a vision, we started envisioning. Now, envisioning is a very important piece of the vision. Vision implies, like, hey, I'm seeing this. Now I want you to envision it. I want you to take all your senses. I'm hearing it from people. I'm feeling the hug from people coming up to me going, brother, you saved my life. I was in a dark hole. And you and the rebuilt recovery team changed my life, which then in turn changed my family. And it's going to help me with those kids. It stops with me now, right? And now you're bringing your senses to it. And we have taken that little snippet of y'all wanted to be a SEAL on a sunny day, and we've expanded what the whole movie script looks like. And now we're envisioning. And when we get to that point, now we're ready to write out, hey, this is my North Star, right? This is where I'm thinking this is where I want to be in 5, 10, 20 years from now, which is what that accordion vision board will help you do. And by the way, you may get to some and be like, yeah, I was really hot bothered about it at 2 o'clock in the morning, but that particular vision doesn't fire me up. What really fires me up is rebuilt, working with churches and schools instead of, wherever you decide to go. But that process of just taking the snippet and then bringing your senses, envisioning the future outcome and how it makes you feel and how it makes others you love feel as well, starts the process of actually manifesting what you're after. After we've gotten that, which by the way, that's really the hardest piece. That's the next hardest piece. The hardest piece is then coming into daily action on chipping away at something that we're doing a lot of output, lot like your metaphor of working out, right? I'm 300 pounds and I want to get down to 180 pounds and I want to be totally chiseled, super cock diesel. And all of a sudden I'm at 300 pounds and I can barely lift 20 pounds. And we're like, this is going to take forever. I'm going to give up because the hypothetical whiner starts to show up. That's the challenge of doing something new, is like, we're going to have to do a lot of output before we get some input.
And I think that's where most people lose it, right? In this process is it's in the execution. It's staying in the grind because the goal is never going to be hit most of the time in the short amount of time that you thought it was going to be. It's always going to take a little bit longer. There's always going to be more adversity. There's always going to be more setbacks. So you notice most people don't lack in the dreaming or even in the envisioning part of it, but it's actually in taking the daily action. Has that been your experience? Is that where most people miss this?
100%, because the daily action, you're not going to, as they would say, build Rome in a day, right? If you got a big, hairy, audacious dream, it's probably 5 years away, just like what you did with rebuilt recovery, right? It took you 5 years to get where you are today. It's going to take you another 5 years to get you maybe halfway to that envisioning you've had of where you really want to be. And you may not even want to share it with anybody. You may want to say, like, Frank, you kidding? You want to impact 10 million people? That ain't going to happen, right? You don't even bother telling those kinds of people. You might tell a swim buddy, we're like, hey, this is what I want to do. But the challenge then is waking up every day when it's raining out and it's cold and it's wet, metaphorically speaking, and you're like, you know what? haven't seen any output, or I haven't seen any input from this, haven't gotten any feedback. That's what I mean by input. But I'm going to do the work. I'm going to swing the hammer. I'm going to chop that. I'm going to take another chop at my dream. Whichever metaphor you want to use, it's taking those steps one after the other. Break. I tell this story often about climbing Denali when I turned 50. Denali is the largest mountain in North America, 20,300 feet. It's a very hard mountain to climb because it's an unsupported climb. You got to bring your own food. You got to have 65 pounds on your back, 65 pounds on the sled, and you got to go up and down, right? Because you can't carry it all at once. You don't see the top of that mountain until about 45 minutes, if you're lucky, day 15, because it takes that far to get up there, and you make that final turn, and then you see the summit. All right? Remove the unit day, put in months, put in weeks, put in years to see the rebuilt recovery summit that you're after. And here's the irony. You're going to finally get there. And the reason you have gotten there is that you've found the pleasure in the grind of taking that daily action step towards that summit. And when you get there, it turns out to be a false summit. It turned out that, hey, that summit of 1,000,000, that's just the beginning for you in Rebuilt. Actually, it's 10 million. That's the summit we're going to. And by the way, we may never get there because you get so much joy every day from the grind of giving you the best of yourself to help others, and they lean into you and give the best back to you, that you're on that mountain for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I love this, man. And I think, what you're speaking to here is it's this mindset. And obviously we're going to get into your book that's sitting over your left shoulder right now, Unstoppable Mindset. But
we're in it already, brother. We're in it already.
But it's this mindset that we see in like the top athletic performers like in the world, right? Guys like Tom Brady, Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan. Like what separated them was that they weren't training for a championship. They were training for reaching their ultimate performance. It's like once they got to the winning of the Super Bowl, it's like they were supposed to be there. It's like it didn't shock them. It didn't surprise them. They didn't celebrate. They're back on the training field the next day. They're back in the workout room the next day. It's like they had that vision. They played it out so many times. It's like, yeah, I'm supposed to be here. And I think that's where you're saying you get to the top of the summit, you get to the top of the mountain. It's like, no, it's just the beginning. It's like, because I've enjoyed this process of getting me here. Was this something that you took from the SEALs, or did this come later on in your professional entrepreneurship journey that some of these things began to click for you?
I'll tell you, the first time it really started to click for me was way before SEAL Team. And I talk about this story in the book about training to make this rowing team in high school when I was 15, 16. And I was terrible at all these ball sports. I scored on my own teams in 4 different sports: lacrosse, hockey, soccer, basketball. But I found the sport of rowing. And the idea of, sitting on my butt, going backwards, pulling an oar, I loved being on that water. And I loved being in a boat with 8 people. And the whole focus was just getting these blades in the water at the same time. And the key to rowing was you had to learn to endure the pain. And the more pain you could endure, the better you were going to be. Because this was a direct correlation to how much work you were willing to put in to build your aerobic base, to push your anaerobic threshold. The best rowers weren't necessarily the ones that had the perfect stroke. They were the ones that could get up every day and go into that pain cave on that rowing machine or in the boathouse and get a little bit better. And that's where I learned to, we say this in SEAL Team, embrace the suck. Or in the case of instructor Half-Butt saying, are you going to focus on the pain, or are you going to be thinking about the pleasure that training will provide you? And I used that, and then it got really tested in SEAL training. And then, by the way, it got really tested as an entrepreneur, gets really tested as a parent. It gets tested as a community organizer or working in working on a church or working in the school board, working in profit, nonprofit environments. It's all the same. It's just different language and a different environment, but they all have the same attributes to helping you do something new to you.
I love that. I love that so much. And I want to talk about here in a little bit, maybe, I don't think we touched on it the last episode, your transition from SEAL teams into the corporate realm. But before that, you mentioned we've been talking about the book here, Unstoppable Mindset. Guys, it's over. Those of you watching on the audio or watching on the video, it's right over Alden's left shoulder. We'll have it linked down there to pick up the book in the show notes. But talk to me about the origin for you putting this book together, right? I'm sure you and I would both agree that there is plenty of books out there on developing a winning mindset. You know, there's like in the personal development, there's thousands of books that talk about how to have a proper mindset, how to change your mindset, how to develop a winner's mindset, the champion's mindset. Like if you needed a book on mindset, there's plenty out there readily available. What gap, Alden, did you see in the marketplace when it comes to all these books that are already talking about developing mindset, and how does Unstoppable Mindset actually fill that gap?
First of all, that's a great question, Frank. Thank you for
I told
asking.
you I'm good at this thing, man.
I love that. The first thing I want to offer up to everybody is, I've been on the speaking circuit now for 10 years, and I speak on what I call the 3 levels of leadership. And those 3 levels build upon each other. The first one is leading you. The second one is leading teams. And the third one, the largest one, is leading the organization, which is like a team of teams. But they build on each other. A team is nothing more than a reflection of its leader. An organization is nothing more than the actions of the leaders of their teams inside of that. If you boil it all down, it always comes down to leading you. A lot of people will talk about, hey, this is how you can change your mindset on dealing with a negative to a positive. But what they can't really share is the practitioner's point of view of going from a Division I athlete to a Navy SEAL to starting multiple businesses to being involved in community organization to leading 4 boys who have all gone on to do exceptional things in their own sport, all using exactly the same tools that I've learned over 40 years. And these tools that I've created, and you end up learning these things as you start teaching it, because I do a lot of executive coaching. They're solid. They work. They've worked with large organization CEOs. They work with a 14-year-old boy who's trying to make the national team in water polo. It's the same. And I'd like to think I have some very unique stories that help bridge you to remind you on how to use these tools that I've created and simplified over time. And one of the other important things is, if you can't remember the tool, if you can't remember what you're reading, it doesn't do you any good. For instance, I've created an acronym around focus. There's 3 main controllables: thoughts, focus, beliefs. And they work in what I call the mindset loop. They all build upon each other. And how we treat focus is like a funnel. And there are 5 different ways that we can sharpen our focus that I call out with focus, the acronym. And we use these things to help you. You don't have to use them all, but at any given time, one of those can help you redirect your focus. Or how we build out the positivity gym. And I use that in the thought process as like, look, we have our internal gym. We can build our own positivity gym. And how we deal with beliefs with the I can loop of identifying, challenging, assessing, and then neutralizing the limiting belief to bring in an empowering one.
I love that, man. I love that. And it's this consistent theme that we've had this entire conversation around everything starting with self-leadership. I think one thing that kind of separates what we do, at least in our space, we have an entire 12-week course on self-leadership mastery. It was actually a year-long mastermind that we condensed down into a shorter course that I partnered with my good friend Larry. But I believe when you're struggling with addictive behaviors, right? There's lacking of leadership, right? There's lacking of self-leadership in your life. Like you're not leading yourself accordingly with who you were called to be. That's why you go this direction when you're supposed to be going this direction. That's a lack of self-leadership. Now, there could be other roots that are kind of driving the need to go this particular way, or the want or desire to go this particular way. But if we can look at it through the lens of self-leadership, then we can begin to have an empowering approach to learning some of these things. Self-leadership is something that can be acquired. You talked at the beginning that everybody's a leader. It's not a title. It comes into the belief system more than anything. How can somebody that is struggling with leading themselves, leading their family, begin to identify and see themselves as a leader? How do we change that mindset other than hearing this on the podcast? Like, what can we actually begin to do and implement into our life to begin to see ourselves as this leader?
Remember when I mentioned earlier, Rome's not built in a day, right? Yeah. We've got an envision of who we think we can be. You know, when I was considering subtitles for the book, the subtitle of this book is How to Use What You Have to Get What You Want. But the other subtitle was Activate Your Potential. And when we think about activating our potential, we think much further down the road. And where we can get discouraged is like, oh, I'm not there, I'll never get there. But we have to understand we take little baby steps. You know, one of the reasons I love your philosophy is exactly why I created the perfect push-up to begin with, and the ab carver and the perfect pull-up and the perfect sit-up. It was, hey, let's lead ourselves physically. Let's take control of our body. What can we do to take control of our body? Hey, for 30 minutes, I can just drop down, do one push-up, and stand back up. I mean, you don't even have to do that for more than about 5 minutes, and you'll be exhausted, right? We can go for a walk. We can go for a run. Now we're just taking action towards one piece of our leading. And if we think of our personal leadership in 4 quadrants, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, those are the 4 quadrants of leading ourselves. And I talk about all of those quadrants in Unstoppable Mindset. But when we get to a point where we're like, oh, I'm never going to get there, imagine the difference after we get ourselves a state change. A state change is changing our attitude at that moment, saying, okay, I'm starting to get down. I'm noticing the whining showing up. I'm going outside, and I'm going to go for a 30-minute walk. That's it. I'm just going to go for a walk, go outside, do a couple laps around there, and then go check back in with yourself. And you're like, hey, I just led myself to do a walk. I'm feeling pretty good. You know, the next thing I'm going to do, I've been meaning to read this chapter of this book about Turning Pro by Stephen Pressfield. I'm going to read that right now. And I read a chapter of Stephen Pressfield. Now I've done mental and a physical. And when I do a mental and a physical, well, isn't it interesting? I start to feel better. Emotionally, I'm taking charge. Right? Maybe I decide I want to read a verse out of the Bible. I want to think about how I can give the best of myself to someone else. You know, for the next 30 minutes, I'm going to write a couple letters to say thank you to somebody. Those are all examples of leading myself. And when I chip away at doing those in those different quadrants every day, well, then the activating my potential has already begun.
I love that. I love that, Alden. And I've always said, I think most successful transformations in your life, whether it's transformation in removing an addiction, transformation in improving relationships, transformation in growing financially, it's always going to start if you're stuck and you're kind of like struggling to break through, right? It's always going to start with that physical. Like if you can get hold of your physical body, begin to see the progress. Because here's what's amazing about a physical transformation that maybe sometimes you don't see in the business world or in the relationship world. Is you gain instant feedback. Like that first workout, you feel better. By the end of week 1, week 2 of committing to the process, your clothes fit differently. It's like that instant biofeedback. Then you look in the mirror like, damn, I look good. It's like, okay, bam, now every time you see yourself, it's like that reminder of that hard work, right? It's a reminder of the commitment to yourself. It's like an act of self-love through this discipline. It's like, damn, Alden loves Alden because he's committed to this. And you begin to get that instant feedback. It could be years until you see progress in a business. It could be months until you begin to see progress in a relationship. But within the span of a few days or weeks, physically, you get that instant feedback and that grows the confidence. And like you said, you take that mindset, you apply it over here to the emotional part. You take that mindset, you apply it over here to the spiritual component. So I love that. I love that emphasis on the physical development as a tool to grow our mindset.
You just said something in passing that I really want to remind everybody about, because that's a key piece of leading, is loving yourself. You mentioned that a moment ago, like, hey, you start loving yourself. That piece, folks, if you can lead yourself to loving yourself the way you are right now and saying, hey, keep going. I'm proud of you. Keep it up, Frank. Keep it up, Alden. You're doing it. We're chipping away at this. Well, then guess what? You've already reached a summit just there. And if you can start your day and end your day with a piece of gratitude for yourself and being proud of yourself and being loving of yourself, you have no idea how far you've already come on the leadership spectrum. And it will only help you activate your potential quicker and more effectively.
I appreciate you jumping in there, Alden, and I'm curious your thoughts around this conversation here, because this is one that I've been wrestling with for a while, because I think that there's a lot of misguided direction when it comes to self-love. It's like, accept yourself for the way that you are. You're fat and overweight. Love yourself the way that you are. You're struggling financially. Love yourself for in the position that you are. And I don't think self-love is just accepting yourself for where you currently are, status quo. Real self-love, I think, is rooted in discipline, and it's chasing becoming that potential, activating that potential. That's real self-love, right? How do you go closer to God? How do you love God? By becoming the man that he has called you to be. How do you kind of articulate or even think about the concept of self-love?
Well, the first thing, there's a whole chapter in the book called ambushes. And an ambush in SEAL training is the hardest thing to train for. It's the unexpected. That's essentially what an ambush is, right? You're walking through the woods and all of a sudden the enemy gets a say, and what happens? And they ambush us. Well, training for that and being able to think clearly and calmly on an ambush is a real challenge. And it's a real challenge because we have a small little piece of our brain called the amygdala. The amygdala is our fight, flight, or freeze system. Okay. It's part of what is triggered with our negativity bias. Now, why is this amygdala, this little almond sized portion of our brain, so important? Because if the amygdala fires, it literally shifts blood flow from the prefrontal cortex. This is where compassion, collaboration, creativity live, and it moves it down into the limbic system where we're just dealing with the basic fight, flight, freeze, survival instincts. When the amygdala fires, they say you're roughly about 20% less smart than you are when you're not. Okay? So this is important now. You got to follow me on this piece. When we beat ourselves up, look at you, you fat bastard. You suck. Look how fat you are. You're just a lazy bag of bones. And we look at ourselves in the mirror that way. What does that do to us? Well, that ambushes us. That ambushes us and it fires off the amygdala. And then we're like, come on, you fat, lazy bag of bones, get out there and start working. You're not even working that hard. You're not pushing yourself that hard. Ambush, firing the amygdala. What does the amygdala fire off? It fires off adrenaline and cortisol. Cortisol is a fat blocker. So now all of a sudden, the adrenaline is goosing up our system, and we're only going after short-term energy sources, which are sugars. And now we're getting more frustrated because we're not getting into the fat stores to burn the fat in the first place. We're getting hypoglycemic because we're burning off all the sugar. We're eating more sugar. And do you see the doom loop we've created for ourselves? Now we're still the fat bastard. And we're beating ourselves up even more. And we're still more in a fight, flight, freeze moment, right? That's the ambush. And so the first step is getting out of the ambush. And the ambush is saying, no, I love you just the way you are, buddy. Hey, we got here. We got here for a lot of different reasons, but we don't have to stay here. And I'm proud of you for getting up and trying today. Let's give it our best shot. Hey, at the end of the day, Frank, I'm proud of you. I love you, buddy. Keep going, right? And when that happens, now we're moving this into a positive spin in the other direction, and we start to change and we start to activate our potential. And when we do that for ourselves, and Frank with the Rebuilt Recovery Team goes out and says, "Hey, Bob, I love you, brother. Yeah, I know. You did some things you're not proud of in the past, but I love you today for showing up and being with us and taking our class, and you're doing it. Yeah, you'll fail times. We fail every day. But I'll tell you what won't fail, our love for you. And when you learn to love yourself, well, now we can love others. And when we can love others, they can love us back."
Love it. Love it. And inside of our program, we have what we call our daily five. It's our 5 habits that we want all these guys taking action on. It kind of fills the day. It checks these 4 boxes: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. One of them is starting the day in a gratitude practice. So, written gratitude practice, 3 things that you're grateful for. Really try to embody and feel that. And another one is an evening reflection journaling. So, no matter what happened throughout the day, spend some time every single night thinking about all the things you've been thinking about. Recognize yourself for the wins, identify where the shortcomings were, and make a plan to not allow those same shortcomings to happen again the following day. A few months back on one of our brotherhood calls, so we have our group coaching. We meet, a couple times a week with all the guys that are in the program. One guy specifically in the program was talking about like a practice that he learned on his own, not even something I taught him, was when he would have a relapse, right? Relapse is you acted out with pornography when you were committed to not doing it. A lot of guys will fall into that cycle, that negative cycle that you were just sharing there, right? You had a relapse. Damn it, Frank, you're an idiot. This is always going to be your reality. You're never going to break free from this thing. You might as well just go do it again, right? And it creates this perpetual cycle where now I'm already in the pit. I might as well just stay there. And porn sometimes for many of these guys become the only thing that will make themselves feel better. One thing that Christian was sharing with us that he realized was even if he had a slip, even if he acted out when he was committed to not doing it, he would make sure before that day ended at night, recognize himself for something good that he did. So he never ended the day on a negative. It was like, even if it was a horrible day, even if I didn't make progress in my business, even if I didn't get my workout in, even if I did slip up and act out, I still want to end the day in that positive loop. It's exactly what you're speaking to here. The power of that internal dialogue, the power of those voices that we are in control of inside of our head.
Amen. And I'd be putting my arms around Christian. I'd be like, "Hey, brother, the mere fact that you have created a daily habit of doing this is going to help you get stronger the next time that hurt shows up, and you'll come up with a switch to move your focus to something that has a longer term envisioning of what's important to you."
Yeah. Yeah, incredible. I want to end here. Last couple questions, but I want to touch on faith here a little bit. You and I, before hitting record, we're kind of talking on this piece, and I think it's the last chapter within your book. But all these things we've been talking about, right, are going to require an element of faith. Hearing that whisperer's voice, leaning into some of these things, having this belief that this envisioning will play out over time. There's got to be elements of faith that will guide us in doing that. What role has faith played in your life, in the past, currently? And how does having strong faith, whatever that looks like for any of us, play a role in developing this unstoppable mindset?
Whole chapter at the end of the book dedicated to this. And it's almost as if I were to say, when all else fails. Because, by the way, all else will fail. Now, remember, when you are out doing something you've never done before, I make the metaphor of like you're the captain of a ship and you've gone across the horizon and you no longer can see the landmarks that are your comfort zone back at your harbor of safety, right? You are out at sea. You have to use different navigational tools when you can't see land anymore. And one of the most powerful is going to be your North Star, your celestial navigation. Now, I use the metaphor of this as faith. Now, I want to be very specific on this. There are 2 main definitions of faith in the Oxford Dictionary. Definition number 1: to have 100% confidence in someone or something other than yourself. Number 2 is that with religious doctrine. I am after definition number 1. When you go out and do something you've never done before, there will be something that will be so overwhelming to you that you have no idea how you are going to overcome the obstacle. You will be scared witless, and you must learn how to let go of that fear and embrace the inevitability that you can do it. Now, the way you let go is with faith. And I've had to do this many times. When I was trying out for a rowing program, when it looked like I was going to get kicked out of SEAL training, when I was trying to deal with one of all three of the different bankruptcies of my business, so many times I have had to have 100% confidence. And for my case, it's God. It can also be at times my team, whether it was in SEAL team or it was in my business. I don't know how to do it, but I have 100% confidence that we can figure this out together. That faith is what I consider the highest form of trust. I call it trust squared. When you have that much trust in somebody, that means you have faith. And you can have faith up above in a higher power, and have faith in Frank Rich and the rebuilt recovery team. But the process of letting go opens you up to new opportunities and lets that fear pass through you. It's very important. That's how you walk through the deepest, darkest valleys of the shadow of doubt.
Beautiful. I love that. Love that so much. Alden, this has been an absolute honor, man. Love having you back on the show here. Guys, if you didn't, check out the first episode with Alden, episode 195. We'll have it linked down there in the show notes. We'll also have all of Alden's books, the latest book, which is out as of yesterday at the time of this recording. So by the time you guys are hearing this, Unstoppable Mindset, been out for a couple of weeks. We'll link it. Amazon, we'll get the website, Alden-Mills. We'll have access to the free training on goals and visioning as well that we touched on in the beginning of the podcast. And Alden, anything other than the book that, super excited, upcoming, that you want to direct the guys to, and we'll wrap it up with our last and final question.
It's really just the book's launched, and any and all support around the book is always grateful. I really just want to leave everybody. My intent of being on here today is to remind you, you are built to be unstoppable. It's inside all of you. It's a choice. You can do it. I want this session with you, Frank, to be a good, loud, clear whisper of the winning voice.
Yeah, and I think we hit that. We hit that for sure, guys. So go out there, check out the book, check out episode 195 and all the other great things that Alden and his team and organization are putting together. Alden, I asked you this question last time, and it's been, I think, 11 months since we had it on the show. So you may not recall your answer. I don't think I remember exactly what you said here as well, but we love to end every conversation with the same and final question. So title of our show is called The Superhuman Life. Alden Mills, Unstoppable Mindset. How do you define living a superhuman life?
Giving the very best of you. Now, I want to be specific on this. We all have a gift. Learn the gift and then give it away every day. Find someone to give it to every day. Sometimes the gift could come right back to you. You want to have a superhuman life and you want to supercharge your life? That is how you do it. Give your gift and give it without expectation of return.
Amen. Well said. Well said. Guys, Unstoppable Mindset, link down there below. You have a gift, find it. Hopefully this conversation helped you in maybe identifying some of those gaps and how you're going to bring that to the world, whether it's the mindset, the belief system, the faith, or the actionable steps that need to be followed through and executed upon. But it's been an absolute honor, guys. Make sure to check out Alden's work. If you got value out of this episode, you can rate, review, make sure to subscribe. But most importantly, share this episode with as many people as possible. But for Alden Mills, Unstoppable Mindset, your host, Coach Frank, we love you guys. We'll see you next week.